So after the release of Verdict Day, Armored Core was in the worst spot it's been since the beginning of the franchise. Not because Verdict Day was bad, poorly received, or sold poorly, but because of this bad boy. See, Armored Core Verdict Day had sold a couple 100,000 copies globally, and Dark Souls had sold a little over 10 million. So it was only natural that FromSoftware would run with the Souls games going forward. But after 9 years of silence, a trailer for Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon was shown at the 2022 Game Awards, and after a short 10 months of advertising and hype, was released to the public. So was Armored Core 6 worth waiting nearly a decade for fans of the franchise? Well, let's talk about it. And before getting too far into the video, I should mention that this is the 16th in a series of videos where I'm playing every Armored Core game for the first time and reviewing them as I go along. And while you don't have to have seen the other videos in order to enjoy this one, you'll be missing a lot of context about my personal journey with these games if you haven't seen them, so I'll have the playlist linked in the description below for those of you that want to go and check those out first. And as of making this video, this is the latest release in the franchise, so let's make sure that we send this series out with a bang. But with that out of the way, Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon is a mech-based third-person shooter developed by FromSoftware and released for the PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X, and PC in 2023. And if you've been paying attention, that also makes this the first, and as of writing, only Armored Core game released natively on PC. And the first thing you're likely to notice with this game is that the near-decade break has led to a massive leap in visuals from Verdict Day, which is even further helped by the art style. Somehow, AC6 manages to have both a distinct art style of its own, while also bringing in elements and styles from basically every older generation of Armored Core. You'll find yourself seeing ACs, MTs, environments, just a whole bunch of things that resemble things that you've seen in the previous games, and it's really cool to see how even after a decade, the art team for this game seemed to have a fantastic understanding of and love for the Armored Core style, no matter which style it is we're talking about specifically. The next thing you'll notice when starting up AC6 is just how smooth the controls are. Movement mechanics from the Gen 5 games have been brought back, such as the boost kick, glide boost toggling, overboost, quick boost, but with a faster pace that feels more similar to Gen 3 out of all the games in my opinion. And all of this just controls so well. Well, except for the glide boost toggling. The Gen 5 games worked off of a hard toggle system for the glide boost, meaning you could only enable glide boosting by tapping the button, and then only disable it afterwards by pressing that same button again. But in AC6, your glide boost will disable if you stop moving for about a second, meaning that if you're anything like me, you'll end up accidentally turning it off all the time, leading to some really awkward moments when you try to start moving again. The hard toggle system in Gen 5 definitely felt a lot better to me personally, and going forward, I would much prefer to see them go back to that compared to the changes that they made here. Along with the returning movement mechanics, the aiming mechanics of Gen 4 have returned using that good old soft lock and hard lock toggle system. And here, the balance of a hard lock system has actually been balanced pretty well. When using the soft lock, you'll lock onto targets faster, and your AC will over or undershoot targets much less often than compared to using hard lock. This means that while you can toggle the hard lock on in order to focus more on your movement and other mechanics, in terms of aiming, you'll actually be at more of an advantage if you use the soft lock. This goes a long way in preserving the skill gap of the game while also allowing players who aren't as advanced with the mechanics to get in and have a good time playing it, and I think it's a really good balance that they found here. And while we're talking aiming, now would be a good time to mention the new multi-missile lock mechanic. When locked onto an enemy, you can hold the button to launch your missiles instead of just tapping it to instead lock onto multiple enemies on the screen, sending your missiles towards all of those targets instead of just one. This isn't something you'll use constantly by any means, but against groups of weaker enemies, it can be a great way to clear the screen quickly, and let's be honest, it just looks really damn cool. Continuing with new mechanics, we have what is easily the most controversial addition to AC6 for old school fans, that being the repair kits. These are a limited amount of healing items that you get for every mission, 3 to be exact, that when used, heal your AC for exactly 4,000 AP. And to clear the air for those that haven't played the game yet, these are not here to make the game easier for newer players. These are here because the missions in AC6 are much longer than in traditional Armored Core games and pack way more enemies than we've ever seen from the franchise on top of that. So the repair kits were added out of necessity to balance these more difficult missions, and thankfully, AC fights and bosses have also been balanced with these in mind, meaning they don't destroy the balance of those interactions either. And then there's the other very controversial addition to AC6, and that's the ACS system, or more commonly referred to as the stagger system. This is something taken straight out of FromSoftware's recent title, Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice, in which when taking enemy fire, a meter at the bottom of your screen will slowly fill up, and when it's full, your AC will get staggered, making it so that you're unable to move for about 2 seconds, as well as taking slightly increased damage in this state. This system is also applied to all enemies in the game, meaning that your weapons are just as capable of staggering them. In my opinion, this system makes both AC fights and bosses much more dynamic than in previous games, so I enjoy the addition. And in my experience, the stagger system never really comes into play when just fighting large groups of MTs or basic enemies, so honestly, it's not really worth talking about there, it really just applies to the heavier enemies. But I find myself needing to maintain a more constant pressure on enemies and bosses in order to stagger them and get the large punishing damage out of it, and I think that it massively increases the pacing and the intensity of the combat here. You can even make some purely stagger-based builds, which, take it from me, are incredibly fun to mess around with, and I definitely recommend giving it a shot. Another thing I noticed from the first mission was just how incredible the melee combat felt in this game. After nearly a decade of exclusively developing melee-based combat games, FromSoftware has really learned a lot about how to make weighty and satisfying melee combat systems, and it really shows in this game. The level of polish with the melee here is nothing like the Armored Core franchise has ever seen before, and thankfully, it's still incredibly powerful here, meaning you'll get plenty of excuses to play around with it. It also synergizes incredibly well with the new stagger system, allowing you to slowly build up to a stagger, then using your melee weapon while they can't move to hit them incredibly hard. It's a ton of fun, and I even made a couple of purely melee-based builds during my playthrough just because of how much I enjoyed it. And if all of these new mechanics and systems sound overwhelming, well, don't worry, because AC6 actually has training missions that are purely designed to teach you the basics of the game, and even some more in-depth concepts like buildcraft and advanced combat tactics. And don't worry, these are not like the 9-breaker training exercises, these are just one short course apiece, and they're incentivized to complete for all players, whether you're new or a veteran alike, because they award free parts upon completion, so it doesn't feel like you waste your time even if you already know what the game is trying to teach you. And since I've hinted towards it a little bit, we need to talk about the customization. Armored Core 6 does not have a ton of parts. In fact, it might be one of the smallest selection of parts in the entire franchise. However, FromSoft took a very intentional approach here. Instead of making a bunch of slight variations of parts that serve the same purpose, every part in Armored Core 6 serves one very specific purpose, meaning that the builds actually ended up feeling more diverse than usual to me personally, despite the smaller selection. The melee weapons are actually the best example of this, since there's only ever one of each archetype. There's one laser blade, one lance, one chainsaw, one baton, you get the idea. Each of these have completely unique movesets, leading to completely different styles of play depending on which one you're using. So hopefully that example just gives you a better idea of why there are so few parts in this game, but why the build diversity still feels pretty great in my opinion. Armored Core 6 also sees the return of weapon bays from Gen 5, but shoulder weapons have also been brought back, meaning you can mix and match with them as you please. Do you want the classic 2 arm weapons and 2 shoulder weapons? Do you want 3 arm weapons and just 1 shoulder? Maybe just 4 arm weapons to swap between? It's completely up to you and what you want out of your build. I made a ton of different builds during my playthrough that all varied a lot from one another, so hopefully the footage in the background helps to showcase what I'm talking about. But believe me when I say that build crafting is just such a good time in this game, and I feel like I spent more time than usual just in the garage mixing and matching with different builds. AC6 also brought an addition that I never knew that we needed, but that I feel like we can never go back from now that we have it. In a lot of the levels in this game, there are very tall vertical climbs that the player needs to make, and in some previous AC games, this would just lead to you being completely locked out of completing that mission with certain builds. But here in AC6, they've added these catapults that launch any AC high into the air, preventing the build gating problem that some games like Another Age had. It honestly surprises me that it took this long for something like this to be introduced, considering that Armored Core's greatest strength is the personalization of builds, but regardless, it's a great addition, and like I said, one that we can really never go back from now that we have it. But something I'm sure a lot of longtime fans are wondering about after hearing all of these quality of life improvements is how is the difficulty? Well, it's pretty great actually. Armored Core 6 walks that very fine line between giving the player their mech power fantasy, but also humbling the player and reminding them that there are more powerful weapons in this universe than in AC. The average MT still won't stand a chance against you if you're paying attention, but large groups of smaller enemies or larger enemies, and especially bosses and other ACs, can easily put you in your place if you slip up. And to really put the difficulty into perspective, after playing all 15 prior games and completing every single one of them, I still died to the tutorial boss at the end of the first mission a couple of times. Now, of course, all Armored Core games' difficulties can vary greatly depending on the build you're using, but assuming you aren't using some hard meta chud build here in 6, it's going to be a pretty challenging experience. And speaking of bosses, Armored Core 6 easily has the best boss design in the franchise. This is another thing where FromSoftware's decade of Souls experience is clearly bleeding into AC6 and in a very positive way. Every boss in this game is completely distinct from one another, offering up their own challenges, their own ways for the player to counter their strategies, and of course, their own over-the-top anime as fuck style. Between the core gameplay of Armored Core 6, the presentation of these bosses, and the genuine challenge that almost all of them offer, I absolutely loved the bosses in this game, and I think it's one of the greatest improvements that it brings to the franchise. They even do that classic Soulsborne thing where they bring the tutorial boss back as a standard enemy near the end of the game to show you how far you've progressed, not only with your build and your actual numerical stats, but with your skill as well. It's just really good stuff, and I hope that we get more boss design like this going forward because I feel like it's a huge step up. The only letdown for me difficulty-wise was the arena, and you guys should know by now how much it hurts me to say this. AC6's arena is more traditional, featuring that numbered ladder that you climb one at a time, as well as some great bios for each pilot telling you about who they are as a person. The player's access to higher rank fights is also gated between certain points of completion in the campaign, leading to great pacing like what was seen back in Master of Arena or Armored Core 3, so I think it really checks all the boxes for a great Armored Core arena, aside from the difficulty. I think that in my entire arena climb in this game, I had somewhere around 5 deaths, and they were all to one opponent. The arena also rewards the player with OS chips for victories, feeding into the new OS tuning upgrades. The OS chips can be used to purchase mechanics from previous games, being the method used to unlock boost kicks, weapon bays, assault armor from AC4, and even some new abilities like a small bubble shield or just some small percentile bonuses to specific damage types. I defeated every AC except for the one in this game on my first try, which is a huge disappointment considering how amazing the AC on AC combat is in this game. Thanks to the wide variety in movement types, weapon types, melee weapons, and the return of the assault armor mechanic, AC battles can be incredibly intense here in AC6, and it's definitely a highlight of the game for me. It also helps that thanks to things like the boost kick, overboost, and quick boost returning, the pace of AC battles is incredibly fast, only adding to the intensity of the game. And there's even a side story being told through the arena here in 6 that feeds directly into one of the possible endings for the game. So like I said before, it has everything it could possibly need to become the greatest Armored Core arena we've ever had, but it completely drops the ball on the difficulty of the fights. And honestly, I think the difficulty problem in the arena comes down to one big thing. It's the repair kits. Not because the repair kits make the fight too easy, because the repair kits are actually disabled for both you and opponents in the arena, but it's because of their absence. I said earlier that the AC battles and the boss fights have been balanced with the repair kits in mind, and that's very true, but that means that when you take them away for the arena, you and your opponents both just die so fast that it ends up being a one-sided blowout for one person or the other, and more often than not, I clearly found myself being the person favored in the matchup. It would be really interesting to see what would happen if they just added the repair kits back into the arena, because I think the drawn out fights might lead to more opportunities for players to make mistakes and actually lose their battles. But speaking of endings for the game, let's talk about the campaign structure a little bit. The campaign structure here feels most similar to 4 compared to any of the previous games, being split up into 5 distinct chapters with decision points scattered throughout that will affect the ending you get. For your first 2 playthroughs, there are 2 endings available for you to get, and once you've gotten both of those endings, there's a third one that opens up for your New Game Plus Plus run. There's also a new mission type for the second and third playthrough called Alt Missions, where you'll play the same mission that was available on the first run of the game, but halfway through, something will change all of a sudden that leads to a totally different outcome than before. I said back in 4 Answer that I love this approach to doing multiple endings, and I think that it works especially well here in 6, especially because, much like 4 Answer, the base gameplay loop is just so addictive this time around. There's also a new system added to the game this time called Log Hunt. This is a system where you can level up your log hunt rank by finding particularly strong enemies that are often hidden away from the main path of the mission, and by defeating them, you gain some XP to level up your rank, which then unlocks exclusive parts that you can't get otherwise, and some of the best weapons in the game are acquired through it, such as the new version of the Karasawa being unlocked in the higher ranks. I really like this system because it adds something extra for you to be looking for during both your first playthrough and the subsequent playthroughs you're bound to do to get all the endings. The biggest downside to the game's structure and systems design is the economy though. There really is no economy in Armored Core 6. Parts are relatively cheap compared to mission payouts, repair and ammo costs are very cheap in this game, and you're able to replay missions as much as you want to farm up credits even before having completed the game. To put it into context, in one front-to-back playthrough with no additional credit farming, I built 12 ACs. And not even in the sense that I was selling my parts back to change them out to something new. I owned all of the parts for all 12 of them at once by the time I got to the end of the game. I could sit here and talk about how mission replay changes, or changes to repair and ammo costs, or just rebalancing the prices in the shop might fix it. But honestly, the balance of this system is so foundationally broken that it would need to be completely redone from scratch in order to fix it. And it's a little thing, but the UI design in this game is pretty fantastic. The menus look clean, they're easy to navigate, nothing's confusing or placed where it shouldn't be. It's just one of the most polished UI designs we've seen in the franchise. I don't have a whole lot to get into about the UI beyond that. I just thought it was worthy of note because Armored Core has really had its crazy ups and downs with UI design, and AC6's is basically perfect. The only minor complaint is that the HUD in-game is a bit bland. It's essentially just a new spin on the Gen 5 HUD, except for all the color has been taken out of it for whatever reason, so it's just a bunch of white bars and numbers all over your screen. And it does a perfectly good job at communicating the information to you, but it's just really bland, and there's no in-game option to change the colors like in previous games, so you're just stuck with the HUD looking like this. And finally, let's talk about the story. In my opinion, Armored Core 6 doesn't have the best story in terms of world building or plot, but it's told and presented in such a way that makes it feel like it's by far the best the franchise has ever seen. The writing is great, even in the English translation, the characters are incredibly likable, and the lore and world building is very strong. The basic premise for the game is that you are 621, an enhanced AC pilot whose brain was fried during augmentation, who mindlessly carries out the orders of their master, Handler Walter. You arrive on the planet Rubicon, and early on, missions are very basic and feel like random busy work for the corporations. But a few hours into the game, you get caught up in a blast of coral, the incredibly valuable resource the corporations are warring over here on Rubicon, and Air, a Rubiconian, gets stuck in your head as a result. Through Air and the events of the game, 621 slowly regains his agency and starts forging his own path, making decisions for himself rather than blindly listening to his handler. And your decisions end up playing a very large role in how the war for the coral on Rubicon plays out. Throughout this story, you'll make friends and alliances on Rubicon, only to find yourself at a point where you need to betray one or the other, and it really engaged me in a way that no other Armored Core story has previously. For example, there's one character, V4 Rusty, who is endlessly likable.
Sorry to keep you waiting. I've got your back, buddy. Hope you've got mine.
And at one point in the story, I had to betray him and fight him to the death. And I was genuinely so upset over this because I felt like me and Rusty were such great partners, and now I was being forced to kill him or be killed by him. At the end of the fight though, Rusty activates his primal armor and escapes. Moments like this really make up the emotional component of the game's story and give it a completely unique feel to those of prior games. Near the end of the game, Handler Walter gets captured and killed by one of the corporations, and I was left with Walter's only remaining ally outside of myself, a woman named Carla. But then I got the reveal that the Coral itself is actually a race of sentient beings that humanity have been burning as fuel for their weapons and technology. So I get put in a situation where I need to decide whether I side with Walter's last wishes to burn all the Coral on Rubicon so that no one can use it to make more destructive weapons, or side with Air, the piece of Coral that's been in my head from the beginning of the game, and save the rest of the Coral from complete eradication. For my playthrough, I decided to side with Air and the Rubiconians and turned against Carla in doing so. And as I was about to go off to retake the ship from Carla on my own, this happened.
It looks like the guest of honor's here. Hey, buddy. Never thought I'd be rubbing shoulders with the liberator of Rubicon. Every Rubiconian who heard your cry rose up to fight. Let's show them there's a future for Rubicon beyond these scorched skies.
So me and Rusty go forward to retake the ship together, fighting a ton of MTs and even a couple rematches against early game bosses. Eventually though, this leads to me having a direct confrontation with Carla and her AI companion Chatty, in which I end up needing to kill them both, taking away Walter's only remaining friend and completely locking me into my decision to betray his final wish. But Carla had planned for something like this, and the ship was already locked into its course to crash into the Coral and set it all ablaze. So for the final mission, I needed to destroy the ship's generators to cause it to crash land back into the planet and save the Coral from destruction. And once I had done so, it was over, and I was just left with this somber float through the atmosphere.
The Coral's safe. Rubicon's safe.
Is that you?
Of course though, things are never that simple, and now I needed to kill the man who had brought me to the planet in the first place. The man who had only ever done right by me and who I had betrayed in death turned out to actually be alive the whole time, just brainwashed by the corporation. I fought Walter to the death, and then it was actually over. And this is just one of the possible ending routes you can go down in Armored Core 6. There are two more that also have a completely unique ending sequence based on your actions, and they're all very much worth seeing. So overall, Armored Core 6 is a great return for the franchise. It feels completely unique from previous generations, but it also feels like it takes design cues from pretty much every single one of them, leading to a game that feels completely distinct, yet so familiar for longtime fans. It really managed to blend the things that fascinated me from the early generations and the positive innovations of the 4th and 5th gens, and make what is, in my mind, the greatest Armored Core game ever made. So at the end of the day, I'm going to give Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon an 8.6. And that's it, you guys. We have played and reviewed every game in the Armored Core franchise. It was a long 4 months of work, but it was a worthwhile journey to go on, and I hope that you guys enjoyed the series. I will be moving on to a new series after this video that, as of writing, has not been finalized yet, but I've got some great ideas, and I'm really excited for whatever comes next. You guys really made this series possible, since without all of you, I'm just a guy sitting here talking to himself, and I probably would have dropped it way back in the Gen 1 games. So I'd love to see you guys hang around the channel wherever we go next. Don't think that I don't recognize your name or your profile picture, because I absolutely do. But if not, thank you again for even spending this much time watching. And just know that whenever something new comes from the Armored Core franchise, I will absolutely be looking forward to covering it, and you can totally expect a video from me. But anyway, what do you guys think about Armored Core 6? Let me know in the comments below. And if you guys enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a like, a comment, a subscription, anything to let me and the algorithm know that you did enjoy. It helps me out a lot, so I'd really appreciate it. And if you're interested in supporting the channel financially, consider checking out becoming a channel member or a patron. They start as low as $1 a month and can get you things like behind the scenes updates, early video access, and more. YouTube's ad revenue can be pretty inconsistent, so the members and patrons really make these videos possible, and I can't thank you guys enough. But if you can't afford it, don't worry about it. We've all been there, and your likes, comments, etc. already help out the videos plenty. And hey, if you enjoyed this video and you haven't seen them already, then you definitely enjoy the rest of my Armored Core videos, so I'll have those linked right here on screen.